Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode of Eggs. Today we have a special guest. His name is Ian Reynolds. Ian is a partner and the chief solutions architect at Zibtek. Zibtek is a software development consultancy, and they focus on helping businesses build custom software. Ian has spent the better part of his career in consulting and has worked in diverse industries such as finance, oil and gas, retail power, field services, pharmaceuticals, mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, e-commerce, retail, and you got it, software development. So please join me in welcoming our guest, Ian Reynolds.
Hey, Ian, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so glad for you to be able to join you here online and be able to make time, especially now during all this crazy COVID stuff. Just by happenstance, it turns out it sounds like you're in Salt Lake City, and so am I. So it's kind of fun that we're doing this remotely, yet we're so close,
Right.
Close yet so far away.
I'll stop by the studio later and bring you guys donuts once things open up.
Yeah, that'll be great. So cool. Well, so Ian, I guess to kind of kick this thing off, let's talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you came from, how you got into this line of work.
Yeah, so I'll give you the quick 2-second background. And it's by 2 seconds, I mean, closer to 20, 30 seconds. But so, sort of started in startups right after college and helped launch like 8 different things to market everything from pharmaceuticals to, we had some e-commerce businesses, and really got kind of sick of living under my desk, so to speak. So went and did the MBA and then jumped into a traditional consulting role with a major consultancy out of Houston and helped Fortune 500 companies, all over the US and all over the world, deploy really large enterprise software systems, stand up processes, and really sort of generally improve. And then I sort of transitioned over to the finance side and helped do several billion in sort of transactions and advisory and M&A and divestitures and restructuring. So that was really fun, exhausting, but fun. But ultimately I wanted to get back to sort of really kind of running the show, and found a company, Zibtek, of which I'm now a partner, acquired 50% of that. This is going on about 3 years ago now. And it's been fun ever since. So we've been growing really steadily, and had the opportunity to really build some wonderful things for some wonderful people.
So give us a little rundown on Zibtek, who you are, what you guys do, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, we're a custom software development firm. We have been in business for 10 years, and during the time we've helped probably a couple hundred startups. We have mid-sized businesses that are sort of our sort of primary clients, and then we've had the opportunity to work for Google and Adobe, build really large, just massive solutions, and been sort of inserted in their teams. And our really kind of primary objective is to make engineering accessible for people and for companies, right? So you have a lot of companies that they're really focused on, let's say, just building pool covers, and doing that sort of, but they have software needs when they're sort of growing in their sort of development of their business. And it doesn't make sense for them to hire an engineer in-house. So we try to make that whole process of software development super accessible. We want to be able to take you into a sort of strategy session and a design session, design out your solution, say, hey, does this work? Let you go take it to your constituents, get some feedback, come back, then let's build the solution. And then we project manage all the way through that on your behalf, and then ultimately can support the solution or do what's called a build, operate, transfer, where we build the thing, we operate it for a little while as sort of your engineering and support team, and then we'll train your team to sort of take it over.
Nice.
So can we, sorry, Mike.
No, go right ahead.
I was going to say, can we just take one little step back and do just a little bit of establish some definitions? So I think, software is one of these terms that I think means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so when you're talking about software, do you mean like standalone applications, iPhone apps? Like, I mean, where is your strength, or is it all those things?
The answer is
I just wonder if we can't maybe clarify that or simplify it for the listener.
No, I think that's great and super important. So the answer is yes. So we deploy across about 75 different technologies because we have a depth of staff, right? So we have about 150 engineers on staff that we leverage, and we didn't, of course, we didn't start that way. We're much smaller many years ago, but most people, when they're developing new pieces of software, are typically putting something that's online that is a web application, right? You go to www.whatever.com, and it's typically actually an application of the web that functions like you think, oh, this is a website, but there's really strong programmatic elements behind that. And I would say that is the vast majority of the new things that we're doing, because people have an idea, they want to put a tool online, where previously I had to get, sort of out of the box software, or get some sort of specialized program, whereas I think a lot of things are just being made so that they're accessible online. With that and how we structure things, we often build a mobile application to help facilitate that sort of consumer journey or buyer's journey for those customers. So that is Android and iOS apps. And what goes into that is either sort of a native app is going to be something that is, you really need the highest performance, right? When you're streaming Netflix on your phone, you have a native app. It's written for iPhone, it's Swift or Objective-C. And then for Android, it's going to be in Java, right? Or Kotlin. And because you need the highest throughput possible, which I'm only going to get with sort of native development. But everything else is typically best done with something like hybrid development, where I'm writing one technology in React or Flutter or Zarmin or one of these other ones, or Ionic, and it's basically writing two code bases to get sort of the mobile piece. So that's the majority of what we do. But we also help people with really, really high-end web design, right? So if you need somebody who is going to stand up a really, really killer website for your brand, we help folks with that. I'd say that's a much smaller percentage of what we do. And then we also have we have a couple IoT projects where we've got milling machines moving about, and people have little Arduino controllers in the office, sort of manipulating some of that stuff, as well as much more complex and very, very detailed software that's industry specific.
I've kind of got a little bit of background in this. At one point, actually 3-4 years ago, I started going down the road of trying to develop an app myself, and thinking I could go to Linda and teach myself everything I needed to do for this. And I went down a road of learning the wrong way, and then learning the wrong way again, and then learning the right way. But it's just was a complete nightmare of a process. I noticed you guys kind of have like a rapid development type deal that you work out with a lot of your clients. Can you kind of break that down for someone who might have an idea and wants to maybe implement it? How does that work? How does the rapid development process work, and then going from there into more of an actual functioning product?
Right. Great question. So, people have, I guess, kind of been familiarized with that sort of idea of MVP. You want a minimum viable product before you sort of build the end solution. And we take that to heart, right? Because we started as 15 years ago, we were actually a software company providing solutions actually to the tech ed space. But 10 years ago, we pivoted to providing services. And so what we want to do is figure out what that core concept is, define that on paper. What are all the functional use cases that are going to go with that core concept? Get it down to like 20 or 30 things as clearly as we can. Put some criteria around that where our customer and we think the user would say, yeah, that's what I was looking for. Once that's defined on paper in a way that we can really understand that, we're then going to actually try to design it out as quickly as we can. So we have in-house designers. I just shoved a guy into a meeting today, even though he wasn't planning on it, and they're going to sit with a client and try to get the solution to as close to its sort of final form as possible, even though what we're going to build probably in version 1 is only going to maybe account for 20% of that. Because we want to, it's like, building a house, you want to kind of understand where the plumbing is going to be, so you don't have to rip out walls later. So we'll do that. And that process for most clients, takes a little bit less than a month, right? And the reason it takes that long is typically because they're a little slow, but we move pretty quick. And after that, we're going to pair a project manager with the team members you need to build your application the right way, right? So you were right to point out that, there's a lot of things that go into building an application. So there's the development environment, right? So DevOps, that's the sort of the server environment, et cetera, having that structured properly. So we have DevOps engineers. Then there's writing the back end. So things can store data in a database table. That database table is going to scale, and I'm going to be able to retrieve that data really, really quickly, right? So that's a back end engineer. Then we have front end engineers. Those are the guys who are taking the designs making it so that it fits on your screen, right? So and I say front-end engineer, that's people who are maybe specialized in mobile, maybe they're just specialized in web, maybe they're just specialized in desktop software. And they're going to take that, make it so that it's responsive to those 50 million window screen sizes that are available, and then take the data from that back-end engineer and be able to consume it in the front end. And then, so we got to have all three of those guys at some point sort of talk. And then last but not least, there's quality assurance, right? So there are ways when you're building software to automate a lot of the development process, the deployment process and the testing process, so that every time you deploy a change, you're not sort of breaking something, then having to redo it, et cetera. So we bring that sort of full set of skills together and then project manage for our clients, because you're right, it would otherwise take too long to build something that's enterprise grade and cost way more than if you had just kind of one guy trying to do everything.
Yeah, I learned that lesson the hard way.
So I wondered, Ian, if we could have you talk a little bit about it. We mentioned it we saw it on your bio sheet, this idea about agile software development. That's one of these words that now sort of, it means something, but it's become so buzzy. Yes. That I don't know that people have a clear understanding of what agile actually is in terms of a process of development. Do you mind talking a little bit about that as sort of a platform for developing software? I think we sort of touched on each of the steps, but could we sort of talk about how those pertain to agile?
Sure. Yeah. And actually that sort of statement of yours of like a lot of people have kind of made it a buzzword is very true. We have people come to us and be like, you guys do agile, right? And then that's the end of the conversation.
And they're not even knowing what they're talking about.
They just know they want it.
Yeah. I want that. And so yes, actually we're an agile team, and effectively and part of this, first, let me back up. Part of this has to do with actually the development process at scale, right? So imagine having a team of 20 engineers. How do you make sure that those guys are able to commit code and get stuff to combined in a way that isn't just kind of stepping on each other's toes? Like, how do you move fast? How do you go do that with a team of 60 people? And Agile is, in many respects, a response to that problem, right? You're getting everybody on the same page on a weekly or biweekly basis, and you're laying out the work for that week or 2 weeks so that everybody is really clear on what it is that needs to be accomplished and how you're accomplishing it. And you're measured against some sort of standard to say, hey, Jim, you're really slow this week. We understand because you just had a kid, but next week, let's try to get this many hours in towards this objective, right? So it's also a measure of your engineering output. And there's many ways to skin the proverbial cat, but there are also a couple right ways and a couple right things you've got to do. One, you have to have sort of the internal stand-ups that occur. You've got to have documentation for each ticket and task that the person is going to do, paired with acceptance criteria. So I talked about that previously. Acceptance criteria is I can put something out into the market that the client is going to say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for, or that's part A of what I'm looking for, and I accept that feature as complete. And it can also be checked by that QA person to say, this functionality is as described. So it's a process of sort of breaking really big problems into really small problems, and then measuring those small problems and the performance of the development of those solutions over time. And then, the process will vary a little bit from team to team based on the solution, right? We have some teams that are as small as, one person, and we have other teams that are as large as like 17, 20 people. And the processes we follow are slightly different for the team sizes.
So say, for example, I've got a project I'm working on and I come to you guys and it's a large, huge, big deal. And do we kind of go over the overview of the complete function of what I want to see at the end? Or do you kind of start with the MVP with just kind of an idea of what you want to get to in the end? And then how do you determine on what tech stack you want to build from? I mean, like with everything's changing, like back in the day it was PHP with MySQL, and now, React and MongoDB, and they're all kind of, everything changes so quickly. How do you know that you're starting with the right tech stack in mind for the project that you?
Sure.
Yeah.
So first I'll talk about the sort of end in mind. We try to accomplish that in that sort of design and requirements gathering session. And then, we say, okay, great. And we try to get everybody to sort of agree on that. Everybody kind of agrees that end objective is, we put it on paper, we define it, we have them serialize that with their stakeholders, and then we put that aside. And then we say, okay, now based on these things, how effectively can we break down those requirements or a piece of that requirement? And then how quickly can we execute along that, against that one piece of that requirement? And we measure ourselves after those first couple of weeks of performance to say, this is the pace we're going. This is the, I guess, kind of where we think from a sort of timeline perspective, that's going to put us to get this core thing done. Now, based on how long that's taking, do you want us to pare back part of this, or do you want us to add to it? And so almost inevitably, there's going to be some change of this core thing. We even did some waterfall. So waterfall analogies, like you go from A to B to C to D, and you don't sort of jump back to previous steps. Everything goes until you're complete. But the problem is you could be building bridges that go, like a millimeter apart. And that's why we have really sort of switched to Agile. In terms of the technology stack, the objective that we have as a company, because we're broadly agnostic to whatever tools we're using. The objective we have as a company is make it as maintainable and as supportable as possible. We want our clients to think like somebody who's buying a Toyota or a Hyundai or a mass-produced car. Because if you're building a Maserati, right, or you're building a Mercedes, you can only go to certain vendors in the future to get those things fixed, and the cost you're going to pay is going to be a premium. And we want off-the-shelf parts to be able to work on the cars that we build, so that way, if I need to go scale up resources really quickly, I can go do that, right? And so, broadly speaking, the major technologies that are getting used today are, let's say there's 5, right? So let's just 5 or 6. So there's PHP, right? So Facebook. There's Python, which is Google. There is .NET, which is Microsoft. There's Ruby. I think Airbnb, I think they use Ruby. There is, I may have already mentioned PHP, but there's a smattering of others, right? So there's really, though, PHP is sort of on the decline. Python and JavaScript, so Python and Node.js and sort of other JavaScript components really are accounting for 90% of all new development of software. So that is just totally predicated on trends. And if you assume that the total universe of new application development for most firms is occurring with those technologies outside of certain niche areas, right? Like the finance space is pretty much always going to use .NET because they're already on the platform. But if you assume most new technologies are being developed in those 2 languages or on those 2 frameworks, then it just makes sense to use those things because they're going to be the most long-lived. And historically, that's kind of the process we followed has been true, right? Java, which was the largest programming language for big enterprise projects, is slowly just now on the decline. But it's been the dominant player for 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me how fast things change, and just in that little window of experience that I've had, I mean, like, think I'm learning the right thing, and come to find out it's outdated, and you got to go and learn something completely different. And it's amazing how fast things change. Do you find any problems with like committing to one hosting service like AWS or another down the road? Is there any reason why you would want to kind of stay away from someone like that, or Google's alternative option?
Yeah. So the thing with the various like major hosting providers is that if you go to one of the big players, so Google has a platform, Microsoft Azure has a platform, Amazon has a platform, you're getting actually a lot of premium services, and they make you pay for those sort of out of the gate. And great for most firms where they don't have the resources to set those things up. But for small and mid-sized businesses, it actually is much more cost effective to just go pay for the server capacity with somebody like DigitalOcean or Linode, or there's any other sort of regular hosting provider. The difference is you have to set up some of these things yourself manually, but you actually save 30 to 40% of cost, especially when you sort of scale up a piece of software. So we try to steer our clients where possible to cheaper options. And then if they ultimately, because of, in some cases, there's HIPAA compliance, or we're building like healthcare software, or there's certain data rules and regulations that they're required to meet by a state standard, we may then move them to sort of one of these big player hosts to have better security or what have you.
So I wanted to ask you, so when do I know that I need software, for example? So, many of us are pretty common with, these little website builders and WordPress and you're doing some front end stuff and some back end stuff, and you're doing all these things. But like, where is the break between developing your own software for, whatever it is, this thing you've built online? Or is it better to, use sort of some consumer grade type stuff and just build, maybe a sophisticated website?
Yeah. So the buy versus build is a tough question, but really we tell our clients, and when we're interviewing people, look, it comes down to opportunity cost, right? If you want to ultimately be a top tier provider for your service, for your product, you need something that is, if not fully custom, presented as custom. You need some front end ahead of that software, and a lot of softwares let you actually customize the front end. But you need to have your own business. You need to have your own brand. You can't be reliant on a off-the-shelf product that is going to potentially increase prices on you every year, right? So we use Salesforce, and they increase prices every year. The quality of the product didn't change. Its functional components didn't change. But we also had to integrate 20 other things to get what we needed for our business, and it just wasn't worth it at a certain point. So we actually wrote our own CRM, and it became much more cost effective for us, largely because of how we're structured. But B, we were able to better serve our clients, provide better services, and better track our internal metrics and become a leader in what we were doing because we wrote our own piece of software. If you go to our website, our Zibtek.com, it's actually an app. It's not actually just a standard. It's not a WordPress. It's not a sitting on top of HubSpot or anything like that. It is an app. You can download it on your phone as a progressive web application. The objective that we had there was that we're competing in the service agency space, the consultancy space for software development is brutally competitive, right? So we needed to have the fastest possible experience. We needed to have the best possible experience to attract clients, to retain those clients. So we looked at it as something that is just a part of the sort of competitive landscape. Now, there are other businesses where they've come to us and they say like, hey, I want to build this. I want to build a full-blown CRM, and they're much smaller, and there are off-the-shelf options that could be customized. We said, look at these customization options. Here's price A, here's price B. Which one do you want to do? I'll give you another example of that. We had a company that was a rail transportation company. So they were taking freight by rail to their warehousing and storage fields, and they were paying for 4 different systems. One of them was the pseudo custom ERP system. And I think in total, they were paying probably in licenses and maintenance and service, they're paying like probably $2 to $3 million a year.
Wow.
And this is a big multi-billion-dollar business, but still, that's what they're paying just to have access to the software. And I think they're paying some fees on top of that for some additional service. And we just showed them, look, you could build a system for a few $100,000, and then you could support that system and continue to customize it for like well under that per year. And so you could save millions of dollars a year in writing your own software and supporting your own software. And it can do exactly what your business needs. And you're not beholden to these vendors who, by the way, increase your prices 3% every year. So do 3% on, 4 million, you're saving a chunk of change, right?
Yeah,
So there are, for larger businesses, major opportunities to often cut costs by writing their own software.
Yeah. So like in a situation like that, if they've got these, 3 or 4 different software solutions that they're using to kind of get what they need done, how hard is it to kind of take something like that and extract all the data you need to create a new app? I mean, are they more or less causing a problem to begin with by, band-aiding what they need by using 3 or 4 different solutions? I can imagine that would be a nightmare to try and consolidate all that data.
So I think a lot of times what we've observed is these companies have sort of grown organically into the problem, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, oh man, like we've got to solve this thing for accounting. Let's go get this weird specialized accounting module or whatever, and then try to figure out how to make these two systems talk. So they'll have maybe a data warehouse that they did build that is custom, that takes all that data from all those different data sets and then redistributes it to those other things. And then they're just kind of bolting on these solutions, with some of them not always talking to the other tools. And they get to a point where it's just like, this is not manageable, right? And I need something else. And so we find that they sort of, they grow into those problems typically organically, as opposed to sort of going into solution. And that's where it kind of comes in their head, like, maybe I should just build my own thing.
Okay.
So speaking of those kinds of problems, what are other common problems that your clients are experiencing, or what are the pain points people are finding in the software development process?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we find most commonly with the companies that we help is that they're trying to they're not thinking about sort of long-term costs and long-term consequences of what they've built or architected. They're typically too focused on sort of near-term costs, right? So we may not be, we're pretty affordable, but we may not be the most affordable solution in the short term, right? Because we're going to give you that front-end engineer, that back-end engineer, that DevOps person to actually build the solution correctly. Oftentimes, for especially these sort of like 20 to 30% of our businesses, like startups, right? Those guys are going to go and like, oh, I've got this friend Dave. Dave's real great. I trust him, and he's going to take care of me. He's not going to burn me. But Dave may not have expertise in all 3 of those arenas, right? Whereas I have guys who all they do is DevOps, all they do is backend, all they do is front end, and may not be able to build a solution that's scalable. And then Dave's not coming through for me because now I've got 100,000 concurrent users, and this kind of just isn't working. So the reliance on something that's much cheaper with the hope that it'll work out is really a recurring problem we see, especially for the really small clients. And the other thing we see is, and it's just the nature of the space, right? Where people do rely on just one person, right? They have instead of having a contractor that's a company, they have a contractor that's an individual. And what they'll find is like, guy gets busy, he can't spend as much time. And this is true even of large organizations where, we need somebody who has a team to be able to help us. And typically that actually adds cost for those companies. We've sat and done postmortems with like transitioning teams. And anytime one of these guys has used sort of like a single point vendor, it's been really problematic.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially if the guy only does, front end dev and doesn't really know how to optimize the back end, that can cause major problems down the road.
Right.
I kind of have a question about, the small guys, the guys like me who have this great idea, it's $1 million idea, I'm going to go a long ways with it, but don't necessarily have the funding to kind of approach a company like you. I've been through the kind of, let's go through the funding process, hire this consultant, see if they can get the pitch to the right people and do all this. And I felt like I was burned in that approach. Is there any alternative solutions for the small guy who needs to come to a major guy like you?
Yeah.
That, is there like an equity split option or something like that based off of, does the idea have merit?
For sure. Yeah. So we don't take equity, but what we do try to help people do is define their message, right? We can build you a clickable visual prototype that shows for that potential capital provider, this is what I'm trying to build. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. And having that visible, designed out, wireframed out, clickable prototype is probably the best mechanism for, going to market and saying, like, I want to get this idea funded. We have, I would say, probably a record that would make most VC firms blush, in that 10%. We did an analysis recently. Like, it's like 8 to 10%, depending on when a project is starting or ending. Because we again have 20% of these are our clients. 8 to 10% of the clients we've worked for have ended up either being acquired or getting just crazy amounts of funding. So it's 100% doable. We don't typically recommend that people come in and just like, I've got to build this thing right off the bat. We typically recommend, hey, if you have a really unproven idea, design it out. If you really want to engineer something, build a super, super scaled down MVP, save your money and, sort of go there. That being said, we've developed things for as cheaply as, a few $1,000s to get out into the market. The typical solution because people always ask about, like, what is it going to cost? Well, the answer is I don't know until we get through that first process. I mean, nobody knows, right? There's hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Like, as soon as I can figure out how to write that instantaneously in my head, like, I'm going to start playing lottery tickets. I'm not going to be, but the reported cost by a bunch of independent agencies is, the average application is, and this is a robust application. The average pretty robust application is getting out into the market from anywhere from, $140,000 to $120,000, right? Something like that. And that actually, if you look at that cost relative to what it was a couple of years ago, it's coming down, right? Because companies like ours are getting more efficient. We're able to provide those services in a much more efficient way. And we're also pushing people to, like, hey man, just design this thing out, like, get it so that you can go share that idea with people, get it because you can get it honed. You can get that idea honed with feedback without having people actually interact with it, without actually having people use it. And you come back, build something that's a little more laser focused and get that in the market much more cheaply than if you just sort of build something you thought people wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're talking about ideation and some of these other things, Mike's talking about bringing ideas to market and things. What are some software needs that, or a piece of software or something that needs developed that hasn't been? Like, because I think that this is one of these problems, right? Is you always hear the naysayers with that there's no new ideas and things like this, but like, I don't feel like we've seen everything yet. I see a lot of the same stuff, but I don't see a lot of innovation.
Yeah, for me, and based on some of the work that we've done recently, the answer is, like, to put it pretty generally, something in healthcare, right? So something like 17 to 20% of US GDP is spent on healthcare spending. That's not very efficient, right? Now we have ostensibly some of the best healthcare treatments in the world. They're here in the US. People come here to the US to receive certain treatments. But if you look at the capital intensity of providing really high-end services, like a specialized brain surgeon doing XYZ, it is just incredible. Whereas software, by contrast, once you build something, the cost of maintaining that thing, which sort of extends the human person, is infinitesimally small to maintain relative to its value, right? So I'll give you an example of a healthcare project that we built recently. We have a MD PhD statistician as a client. He built a tool, came to us to build a tool where he's doing prospective studies to, let's say somebody's getting knee surgery and they want to measure patient outcomes after the fact. Well, he used to have a team of 10, 15 people with clipboards that would call these people after sort of a randomized set of days. He'd keep these people in a randomized spreadsheets that only certain people can access. Everything had to be HIPAA compliant so that data couldn't be accessed in a certain way. And we built a tool that lets him put these patients and have his clients put patients into random stratified blocks and in a systematic, randomized way, reach out to those patients and get that data back so that they can understand what those patient outcomes are. And again, do it in such an automated way too. It even sends like text messages and notifications to their phone. And it has allowed him to actually scale up to taking care of or having 30,000, 40,000 patients in these studies, as opposed to, the 2,000 or 3,000 they were limited to when he had people using clipboards, right? So I think the answer is it's the healthcare space. And I don't actually know what it is. I hope somebody comes to me and says, hey, here's a problem I want to solve. And we certainly love solving those difficult problems.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of dev tech going? I was listening to a podcast recently called Grumpy Old Geeks, and it's there are a couple of dev guys that they were talking kind of almost like AI's getting to the point where the basic dev part of it is kind of almost plug and play, or just kind of, like guys getting into the field, the entry level guys almost are going to be out of a job here in the near future. And that more of the guys writing the complex algorithms are the ones that are going to be able to retain a job. Do you see a decline in the workforce or the need for guys in dev?
No, I actually see 100% agree with you. First, actually, I think that sort of frontline basic work is going to go away, but actually that's good. That's actually very good, because it'll take care of a lot of the sort of simple, repetitive things that teams do. It's not fun to put. The guys don't like putting buttons on the pages, right? They want to build these difficult statistical algorithms that deal with big problems, and they want to spend more of their time solving engineering problems rather than doing mundane engineering tasks, right? They want to spend less time drafting, more time thinking about how to make sure that building doesn't fall over, or that piece of machinery does what it's supposed to do. And so you're going to see actually some of these low-code tools be much more prominent. We do a little bit of low-code, low or no-code type stuff, but they're not really going to be the solution for most companies. They're going to be a way to think about and get that sort of MVP out a little bit more quickly, but they're not ultimately going to be these large interconnected solutions where you are really truly going to need custom development to deal with the nitty-gritty of things, right? So dealing with building a regression model that's going to give you that statistical output to sort of understand those patient outcomes. There's not going to be tools that are going to be plug and play for those things. So I think you're going to see engineering, as it relates to software development, move more towards that engineering context, which it has happened in our business. And you're going to see some of these like front end sort of UI components be sort of automated away as frameworks become more powerful. So just look at, I'm sure you've heard of like React and Angular and Vue.js. Those frameworks are incredibly helpful because they standardize parts of the development process and let the engineers move much more quickly in terms of getting these solutions out. The result is that we're going to get better solutions. So like that MVP ceases to be something so simple that the scope of what is in the MVP actually expands, right? So that version 1 product you get to put out ultimately gets to be a much more powerful version 1 product.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there almost like a white label kind of set of code that you can just start with? It's, like say, for example, a lot of the problems that most sites have the similar problems, your login, your registration, your payment processing, this and that. Is there kind of like an entry level framework that you can just start with and then kind of do your UI, UX after that and kind of make it look and function how you want?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So like part of it is the front end, part of it is the back end. So in Python, for example, like Django is one of the largest frameworks that kind of like takes care of a lot of the stuff for you. It's kind of like you get all the scaffolding for the house, you get some of the plumbing, you can decide how things look, but you get the login, et cetera. And that way engineers are saving quite a bit of time and they're really focused on core parts of the application. But it really is kind of, in most cases, okay, we'll give you that, but then the rest of it is up to you. In terms of the UI elements, if you talk about things like React, or let's even use Bootstrap, right? So Twitter Bootstrap came out many years ago, and in large part really kind of revolutionized the way that UI elements were sort of handled in a site. And I can just go to Bootstrap, I can download that framework, load it into the folders of my application, and then basically keep a structure so that things are responsive. If I'm using their sort of UI elements, things sort of look a default way, and I can just call that button class or what have you to save time so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch, because the programmers, again, want to work on those difficult problems. They don't really want to work on
the mundane day-to-day. Yeah,
exactly.
Interesting. So say, for example, someone is coming to you guys for the first time. Do you guys have a minimum consultation fee that you start with? Or is it kind of like, hey, you get one freebie and then we kind of go from there?
Sure. Yeah. No. So we're actually, a lot of companies have minimums. We actually don't. And the reason for that is we were, 15 years ago, we were a startup, right? So we understand the pain, and it's actually more work. Obviously, the smaller clients are much more work than a lot of the larger clients. But we intentionally do that because you never know who's going to turn into a large client. So we have no minimums. We have instances where we just consult for a number of hours. We do, I think typically we ask for, don't quote me on this, but I think this is the sales team. We'll do typically ask for at least 8 hours of consultation as it relates to sort of design components, design and sort of wireframing and talking about sort of that structural documentation. But other than that, we go from anywhere from hourly to traditional sort of staff on.
Sure. If someone already has an existing project that they've been doing, is it better to kind of give you my GitHub info and let you run through my existing code, or is it better to just start from scratch and build from the ground up?
Right. So we'll again, we're technology agnostic. So the advantage we have relative to a much smaller company who has a specific narrow expertise is we're going to be able to say, it's probably going to be faster for us to rewrite, or, in actually a lot of cases, people come to us and they say, hey, I have existing code. Do I rewrite this or can I keep it and keep going? And most of the times it's, hey, this is fine. We do need to clean up these 5 or 10 things, but other than that, let's just continue from this because it's going to save us a ton of time.
Interesting. Good to know.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of ask also related to that, and Mike has sort of alluded to it with his own project. But like, for example, I have a little startup business that is, it's always being backburnered for one thing or another, but one of these days we're going to roll this thing out. And it's being developed or like basically being built across, a number of different like sort of open source or paid platforms. So we're building largely on top of Spotify or Shopify. Mm-hmm. We're using, WordPress for a website. We've got, all these different things that we're paying little subscriptions to and all these things. And basically this is it's like a mail order subscription business. And so I wanted to ask sort of like, when is a project too small? So, now granted, this is a little startup, a little thing, but let's say, my monthly license fees for Klaviyo and for this and that, and all these different things that we're running, are into the hundreds of dollars per month. So, ostensibly we're spending a couple $1,000s a year on just licenses that are going to go away. Mm-hmm. And, so for something like that, does it make sense to come in and try and build a custom platform and, get away from some of these larger platforms? I know everybody loves, Shopify and things like this, but is it better to build your own on something small like this that, has the potential to grow, but, doesn't have any capital investment, doesn't have anything like that? So when is it too small to even bring it to somebody?
Great question. So let's talk about e-commerce, and then let's talk about sort of a marketing website. And then we'll talk about them jointly. So first, e-commerce. We would actually recommend that we do for a lot of our clients that are much smaller, that they ultimately start with something like Shopify or Magento or BigCommerce or what have you, because what you get out of the box is pretty great, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel for those things. And in fact, when you pay for the premium versions of Shopify, you can really just kind of leverage their APIs to build a much more robust platform on top of, and we've done that. So what you get with those tools is pretty fantastic. Now, as relates to, so as a starting point, would recommend going that route. Try to keep your, I guess, kind of tier level to the lowest tier you possibly can. And if you factor in the traditional cost of hosting plus, whatever else, you're probably paying a little bit more for Shopify, sure. or one of these other guys. As it relates to hosting a website, we would typically recommend that you actually try to reduce your hosting costs as much as possible. You really shouldn't be paying, we have thousands and thousands of visitors to zibtek.com, which by the way is an app. And that's daily that we have thousands of visitors. And so we actually try to keep those hosting costs minimal because it's just a marketing tool, right? That should actually probably be, anywhere from only $20 to $50, including sort of Cloudflare protection stuff. And so you want to try to keep those as low as possible. Where you can have your Shopify store, now this is combining those two things, where you can have your Shopify store also be your sort of website front, that's probably the best of both worlds, right? You can kill that hosting fee for your marketing site. You can kill the hosting or other sort of affiliated things for that, where you can just use Shopify, even the base sort of version, as your sort of everything with one of their themes or a customized theme. They use, I think it's called Liquid Templating Engine. And we've built a number of really powerful, really SEO friendly stores just in Shopify. So we would typically recommend consolidating as much as possible to save cost. But in terms of that cost of consolidation, look at what that engineering cost would be relative to just staying on WordPress plus Shopify or whatever. If you're small, obviously you need to save budget for marketing and save budget for people being able to find you, as opposed to the engineering solution that you have.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so one more thing I wanted to get into, and this is a little bit of a transition, but it's talking about sort of the value of IP. So as people come to you with software solutions, I mean, they're, like Mike has alluded to, and we talked a little bit about, some of these libraries of assets and, some of these different, fundamental codes and things like that. I mean, what really ends up standing out in a software application is usually something that is unique. What is it they do differently than somebody else? So when it comes to that kind of thing, like, who owns the IP? And, is it possible to break out these unique features of a software set from those that are pretty commonplace? Like, how does one, come to you guys and basically make sure that what they're developing could be something, really unique or an innovative approach to doing something? And the reason I ask is every single year, well, maybe every 2 years, we go through this massive search to find a new project management software platform that's better. I'm yet to find one. Every year we look, and there's people that are really good at 1, 2, or 3 things, and then not great at the other 4, 5, and 6, or whatever. But we've never found the one that was like the unicorn that got it all right. Yeah. And so we've toyed with ideas of how we could maybe improve project management systems as specifically as they pertain to ad agencies and marketing firms. But I wonder then, if they're engaged with you and something like that, and maybe your team uses some of these out of the box things to fill in some of the gaps. How do you protect some of the intellectual stuff?
Sure. So first, I'm not a lawyer, so couch what I say. But everything in software development, custom software development, defaults to contract law, right? So if I have the unique expression of a thing, right, and I've written it and I haven't taken somebody else's code, it is mine, right? Now, there are certain patents that exist as it relates to certain processes that sort of major companies have, and that's sort of where people get into trouble. But if you think about open source, right? So if I use Python, if I use Java, if I use JavaScript, it follows the MIT license, right? It's publicly available. I can't own it. I can use it for whatever purposes I want. And when I build software with it, the open source community doesn't own that piece of software, because I've created a unique expression using the software, right? So, and I can own that unique expression. As it relates to, there's also like off-the-shelf packages, right? So I can go to libraries like NPM, GitHub, what have you, and there's people who put their projects out there to be used by the community to save time, to be efficient, to build things much more quickly, and just kind of generally screw with stuff. And so those are often, they fall under sort of basically public domain. And they'll typically state in there, hey, this is MIT license, that's what I'm releasing it under. And when I do that, all I have to do is reference somewhere on my website, like, hey, we make use of these MIT licenses, and sort of here's a reference back to this person or this thing. And once I do that, I can then combine those things into whatever cocktail I really want or need, as opposed to sort of being pigeonholed by that, right? If I go integrate a third-party piece of software, let's say I have a custom, business, a custom e-commerce business that uses Shopify on the back end. Obviously, I don't own the rights to anything that Shopify executes on my behalf. I do own the rights to the connections and how that information is displayed. But when I go to sell my business, obviously I have to say somewhere in my agreement or what have you that you're also paying for this Shopify license, and I don't own that, right? So it kind of the sort of the paid things kind of must be contained in your legal agreement. When we build things for people, the only time that we have to hold on to IP is when we don't get paid. So really we just turn that over to the client and say, look, we're just here to build the software. It is your IP. Obviously, it also states in our agreements like, hey, like anything we use that's open source that we tell you about and you approve, it's open source. Like you own the combination of those things, but you own the combo to the safe, but you don't own that safe, right? And so take it what you will. And in some cases, we are rewriting those things because people need customizations on top of them. But there's historically really kind of never been problems with making use of sort of open source and available code.
Okay. Yeah, no, and because, I think I was kind of wondering, because I imagine that, key differentiators between like SaaS platforms, for example, will be found in those things. They'll be in the innovative way somebody does something. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out how much of that you could own, like what prevents me from just going to some company and saying, well, it's all open source. You guys configured it crazy, but it's open source. So I guess I can take Twitter and deploy it.
Yeah. Well, so like, obviously I can't you can't copy like UI elements exactly, right? Because actually you go to any website, you can actually copy their code. Like I could go to Twitter and I could copy their layout and I could build a Twitter clone and I could have the UI look exactly like Twitter's and have the exact same spacing of code exactly as phrased. That is something you can't do, right? I can't go take sort of any element of another web application or application and have it be copied and have it be exactly in my application, unless the application says you can do that. But
okay, so it's not unlike a written document or something. If you've written an article for a magazine and somebody steals it, it's plagiarism. So correct. I guess in theory it's the same with the way somebody's written software.
100%, right? It's just like that, plagiarism, right? So now obviously, and that's also part of the magic of it, right? So going back to sort of one of your earlier points, like you have Uber and you have Lyft, right? So if you put an idea out there into the marketplace, like you will have competition. Like welcome to America, right? So right. The idea that your idea is so sacrosanct or so special that you can't let people know about it because they'll compete with you is a little insane. Because, well, as soon as you put it out there, like they're going to compete with you, like that they're allowed to. Like you have a Subway shop across the street, and you have sort of a what's called Firehouse Subs on the same strip mall. Like both guys are allowed to sell sandwiches. Yeah. So don't get so caught up in the idea that we deal with this all the time with especially these small clients. Don't get so caught up in the idea that the idea is so special that it's going to get out there. Like you want the idea to get out there. You should be talking to people nonstop about the idea. What matters is the execution, and does the tool work, and can you market it, and is it really solving the problem for your end user?
Yeah, I think a lot of people get caught up on, my idea is so unique and, it's going to be a game changer. If I tell someone about it, they're going to get to the market before I get there. But really, you want to have these conversations beforehand to even know if it's a product that's viable, that you can even take to market. Because lots of times you're thinking that, this is amazing, but it's amazing to a subsection of people that really there's no market there in the first place. So having these conversations with people actually kind of opens your eyes to some of these things that you don't necessarily think about because you're so in tune into it yourself that you don't look outside the box. But.
Yeah, and so I'll talk really just briefly about an example of times where there were sort of conflicts of code, stealage, et cetera. Oftentimes these big software companies kind of hire talent amongst each other, and they're all kind of inbreeding, if you will. And so they'll hire an engineer who's built something. This happened, I think, at Android. Basically, they had hired a guy from Apple, and then I think that guy went back, and the copy and paste functionality you have on your phone was something that got patented at some point by somebody.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah, and so, but it was really unclear who actually owned it, right? Because do you really own the ability to copy and paste? Well, in some really narrow form, they did. One of these giants did, and so they went after each other. It blew up in court. They wasted a bunch of money, and that's sort of stuff that is kind of more at that sort of like really base programming level that is problematic, as opposed to like, hey, we have 2 apps that let you search for houses. Both have a search bar. Both let you type in search. Like you're not going to get in trouble for that.
Yeah. So, Ian, I guess in parting, where can people find you? How can they reach out if they need to take advantage of your services?
Yeah, so zibtek.com, zibtek.com. If you do, just go to the contact form, say, hey, I heard Ian on the Eggs podcast. He was fantastic. That's probably the best way to get a hold of us. And I see all those, and I reach out to those folks. And we also have a ton of resources on our site. So if you go to zibtek.com, one of the first tabs is a process tab, and it walks you through our process. And depending on, doesn't matter where you are sort of in the software development lifecycle, we can help make that be a launching point and bring you on board and help you out.
Awesome.
Great,
Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
It's been awesome having you on. So thanks so much to everybody who listened this week and every week. If you have questions for our guest or anything to do with the show, all the information is in the comments below or in the notes for the show. And I guess that's it. So we'll see y'all next week.